But it is absolutely wonderful to be here with you this morning. And we are in a very exciting series, very provocative series, 10 Bible stories that you've never heard before. And I understand that this is a spiritually mature audience this morning. So people that you know might have never heard these stories before, but you have absolutely most probably heard them before. Let me just see quickly. We're 3 stories deep. Who has heard all 3 stories so far? Do we have 100%ers in you? Oh, my goodness gracious me. Okay, we're going to have to make it a little bit tougher. So what we're going to do today is we're going to tell a story that I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of before, but this is one of my favorite Bible stories, and this is one of my favorite characters in God's Word. I love this guy, and this moment that we're going to highlight today is one of the moments that you don't hear about all too often, but I really believe with all of my heart that this moment is the moment that really defines for me who this guy is. And not only does it define for me who it is that he is, but it gives us some practical principles that I really believe sort of just gives us such a beautiful picture of what our faith really is all about. So there's a lot of practical things that we can take out of this today for our lives in 2023. The man I'm talking about is David. We're going to be talking about King David this morning. I love King David. And when I say we're going to be talking about David, I'm willing to bet that there's 2 stories immediately that sort of pop out to you when you think about David. The first story that you know and that you think about when we talk about David is David versus Goliath. Am I right? It is the ultimate underdog story. Even today, when you watch movies or you're watching a sporting event or even in songs, whenever you have a moment where there is an underdog that is under the, that is really in a position where they probably should not win, you'll hear the commentators say that this is a classic David versus Goliath situation or story. We absolutely love, as a culture, a good underdog story. We love it because we all, I think, kind of see ourselves as underdogs in life. The second story I'm willing to bet that most of you know is the story of David essentially sleeping with Bathsheba. King David misses it completely. He has a moment of weakness. He has an affair with another man's wife. The end result is that this man would actually go and die on the battlefield. David, in one fell swoop, becomes a liar, an adulterer, and a murderer. 3 for 3 quickly is what happens in David's life. And I'm willing to bet you that that's the other story you know. Why? Because there's only one thing we love more in this culture than an underdog story, and that is to see someone from the top fall. We absolutely love that, don't we? So I'm willing to bet that those are the 2 stories you know. So the story that I want to dive in today is a story that is less known, like I said, but it is one that is absolutely fantastic. So here's what I want to do. I want to set it up for us just a little bit before I dive into this. I preached on David versus Goliath not so long ago, so you should know the story fairly well. But what's happening is that the Israelites are in a bad situation. They're essentially in a war against the Philistines. And next thing you know, this young shepherd boy comes to the battleground. He has been essentially anointed to be the next king of Israel. Remember, the prophet Samuel comes to the house, anoints David in front of all his brothers. I mean, this is the most glorious thing that could ever happen in any sibling's life. All the siblings are lined up, and one sibling gets sort of pointed out as the promised one. I mean, that is every sibling's dream. So that happens to David. He has this amazing moment. And then as that happens, he goes down to the battlefield and he kills Goliath. So David goes from an average Joe out there in the fields looking after sheep to essentially this guy is a superstar, right? He's anointed to be the next king. He took down the baddest guy in the land. Everybody loves this guy. Everybody's excited about this guy. But then, ladies and gentlemen, he gets too famous. And everybody gets too excited about him. And there is a king in the land called King Saul. And Saul all of a sudden becomes a little insecure about this teenager who's getting all of this fanfare And the following basically happens. We're going to pick up the story right here. 1 Samuel 19, verses 1 to 6. David has slain Goliath. David has been anointed as the king of Israel. David is just living life. And then this happened. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill. Yep, you heard that right. The guy that delivered everybody from Israel, that same David, Saul now wants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all of Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Never before has there been a more practical, sound speech. Jonathan is being so practical. He's being so level-headed. He's saying, Dad, don't let your pride and your ego get the best of you. This kid is amazing. Let's not harm him. Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. Saul is going to make a promise now. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Everybody say amen. Danger averted. Thank goodness. Sense has prevailed. Except for this. If you read literally 4 lines on, Saul takes a spear and he tries to spear David to the wall. So Saul remembers his oath for about 3 seconds, and then he tries to kill David because he's had enough of David. And the next thing that happens is David now is on the run. He is fleeing. He is a fugitive. David has gone from being anointed to be the next king to being the darling of Israel, to being the guy that has just killed Goliath. David just had the most incredible God encounter of his entire life. Now he's on the backside of the desert, running like a fugitive because the king of his own nation wants to kill him and murder him and put him to an end. This is not even the story that we're going to dive into yet. I'm just still setting it up, and I can't help myself. But before we even dive into the text, I'm going to go on a little rabbit hole, but I want to say this to you. I want you to hear me this morning. A God encounter today does not necessarily mean a good day tomorrow. A God encounter today does not necessarily mean an incredibly good day tomorrow. As a matter of fact, if there's anything I've learned in my life, there will be moments where the Lord will absolutely shine favor on your life. You will have an incredible encounter with Him. He will give you promises. He will give you a word. You will experience His presence like you've never potentially experienced it before. And in those moments, the temptation is to go, aha, there will never be a bad day in my future ever again. The past is gone. The future is ahead. I want to tell you this morning that very often a God encounter is God getting you ready for the storm that's about to come. What the Lord is doing is He's saying, essentially, there are going to come moments, not so far from now, where you're going to doubt everything, and you're going to be anxious, and you're going to be stressed, and you're going to be on the run. When those moments come, I need you to remember the anointing that was on your life. I need you to remember the good things I've done for you today. God's move today is often your foundation tomorrow. That is why the Bible says we overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. It's about hanging on to what the Lord does in our lives today, because often what He's doing is He's actually preparing you for the storm that comes tomorrow. But let's move on here this morning. I absolutely love the text that we're going to dive into now. And like I say to you, for me, this is one of the stories we don't highlight when we talk about David, but I don't know that there is another story in Scripture that for me sums up more who this man David is than this story. We've heard of David killing Goliath, but now we're going to hear about the time that David spared Saul's life. Listen to this, 1 Samuel 24, verses 1 to 15. I'm going to read a little bit, and then we're going to dive into some of the truths out of this text. And as I just told you, David is on the run for his life, and Saul is essentially hunting him down with a whole group of his men. So let's see what happens here. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Man, this just feels like an action feature film, doesn't it? He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. You can't write this stuff. They're on the journey, and Saul says, listen, we got to make a pit stop when nature calls. You know what I'm saying? There's a dark, scary cave. Men, stay out here. I'm going to go into the dark, scary cave by myself because I got to do what I got to do. Check this out. Then David, being in the back of the cave, he came to the sheep pen along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the same cave. The men said to David, this is David's friends, David's men, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. But check this out. Afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. Listen to this. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, my Lord, the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, why do you listen when men say, David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Okay, against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea? May the Lord, listen to this, because this is what it comes down to this morning. Listen to this sentence. May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand, says David. I'm telling you what, there's a reason why David wrote so many of the Psalms, because David can drop a speech like nobody's business. What a speech, right? We got excited when David walked out there on the battlefield and he said, listen, who is this Philistine that comes to us? God will make a mockery of you today. I will feed your carcass to the birds, essentially. And now we see another moment where David comes up against a powerful figure that is trying to kill him, and he gives a different speech. In this speech, David says, I will not raise a hand against you. I will not touch God's anointed. The Lord will vindicate me. He will be my judge. He will be my protector. There's something unbelievable about this moment, and it's different to the other story. You know, the other story, David is up against Goliath, and it's big and it's scary, but he's fighting for his nation. He's got a lot of people behind him, supporting him. If David dies against Goliath, he goes down as a valiant hero that tried his best. If he wins against Goliath, he's an icon. He's a legend. But in this moment, it just feels different. This is a different thing. It's private. It's out of the public eye. David's own men are encouraging him essentially to do it. If David is wrong on this, he loses his life. The stakes are high. But there's something incredible about this moment. And for me personally, as much as you can see David's faith in that moment when he steps out against Goliath and takes him down, I feel like you can almost more see David's faith in this moment where he essentially lays down his arms in this moment with Saul. So there's a couple of things I want to take out of this whole portion of Scripture this morning that just stood out for me, that is so beautiful. It's so beautiful about David, but I believe it will give us some direction in our life as we pursue Jesus in 2023. The first thing that sort of stood out for me as I read this story was that David did not listen to the wisdom of men. David doesn't listen to the wisdom of men. And I really need you to understand something here, that David is under a lot of pressure in this cave. His men are with him. His men are on the run with him. Their lives are at stake. We're not playing little games here. These guys are going to die if they make the wrong decision. These men love David. They love David so much that they're willing to give up their lives for David. So when David's men say to David, you've got to kill this guy, David's not getting advice from people that don't love him. David's getting advice from people that want nothing but the best for him. So David is getting advice from people that absolutely love him. The second thing we need to understand is that when they say you need to take out this guy in this moment, it is the most practical advice that you're ever going to receive in your entire life. It's absolutely practical. It's absolutely sensible. This king has lost his mind. He made his own son a promise that he would not kill you, and now he is hunting you down. The most sensible, most logical thing to do is to take his life. So people that love him are telling him to do it. His own logic is telling him to do it. I love the way how they even say, David, the Lord has delivered him perfectly into your hands. They're even making it a spiritual thing. They're going, hey, we love you. Hey, this is practical. And then they're going, David, don't you know that God is behind this as well? You need to do this thing. You need to take this guy out. And somehow, in the midst of all that pressure, in the midst of all those voices, David chooses to do something completely different. There is something else that is driving David. There is a principle that David has in his life that supersedes all of the logic and all of the arguments. You've heard it being said like this, and you hear this statement quite often. People will make the statement, they'll say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, right? You've heard that statement. And I believe that this is essentially what's happening in this moment. And I believe that this is what will happen to us in our lives. You will find yourself taking a leisurely stroll in the park, minding your own business. And all of a sudden, out the blue, a couple of guys will pop up out of nowhere. They'll make a little circle around you. And they'll go, what's up? What are you doing out here all by yourself? And they'll give you a little poke, right? And I'm telling you right now that it is in that moment where if you don't have a friend that's bigger and stronger hiding in the bushes that comes out and goes, what's up, boys? What's going on? You're going to find yourself in trouble. And that's what I believe happens to us. Arguments and logic and loved ones. There are voices all over the place. And all of a sudden, before you know it, every voice, voices from the culture, voices from your family, even potentially voices from people at church will come to you and they will try to convince you that you need to do something. If you don't have a principle in your life at that point that is bigger and stronger than the voices, you'll fall for anything. But David has a principle that he hangs on to that is greater than all the voices. And we're going to look at that. I believe it's this morning. Here's the principle that drove David's decision. David would rather lose his life than sin against the Lord. David would rather lose his life than sin against the Lord. David, we love you. David, we're for you. David, don't you understand? David, it makes complete sense. Anybody would do it, David. David, they owe you. They should have given you an increase years ago. There's no problem with you just taking a little bit of money out of the till. They owe you that, David. God is even for you, David. David, just compromise a little bit. But David has a principle. And the principle in David's life is simple. I will not sin against the Lord. I will not sin against the Lord, even if it means I lose my own mortal life. There will be times in your life when conventional wisdom is going to tell you that the only way to get out of your situation is you are going to have to break from what God wants from you in your life. Just hear me this morning. There are going to be times in your life where conventional wisdom, manly wisdom, and everything within you is going to say that the right thing to do is to break from what the Lord is wanting you to do. This wisdom will come from the culture you are in. It might even come from people you love and trust. But David is not operating by manly wisdom. David is operating on a whole different thing. And I believe I know what David is operating on. Proverbs 9 verses 10 says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. If we were to do a sermon series next season on scriptures you never hear, this should probably be in there. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. Now, I'll say this to you. I've heard multiple sermons on this portion of Scripture. And every time I essentially hear this portion of Scripture taught, the way it's taught is like this. They'll say this. The preacher man will get up and say this. When the Bible says the fear of the Lord, it's not really saying you should be scared of God. That's not what it's talking about. It's saying that you should have a real reverent respect for the Lord. That's what it's saying. There's no way on earth anybody would ever want you to have fear towards the Lord. And we hear it, and we understand it, and we nod our heads, and we go, yes, absolutely, that sounds awesome. This portion of Scripture reminded me of something that Jesus said. And tell me that these two portions of Scripture don't somewhat line up. But I want you to hear what Jesus says here, and then we're going to go back to what Proverbs says. Matthew 10, 26 to 28, Jesus says this to his disciples: do not be afraid of them, for nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing is secret that will not be made known. What I say to you in the dark, I tell in the light, and what is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the housetops. Listen to this. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body. Jesus is literally talking about the kind of fear you would have if somebody was going to kill you or murder you. I don't know about you, but that's not like a respect fear. That's just a straight up, I don't want to get killed fear, right? So listen to what he says then. Don't be scared of people like King Saul who would kill you. Listen to where Jesus takes this. Instead, fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell for eternity. So now, let's go back to the fear of the Lord leads to wisdom. I believe the kind of wisdom that's being spoken about here is, if I do this, I might go to hell, therefore I'm not going to do it. Right? All of a sudden, there's a wisdom there now that wasn't there before. And I want to be clear this morning. We understand this morning that God is a loving God. He loves us. He gave His Son for us. He absolutely is for us and not against us. But I do believe that if we have to be honest with ourselves, we have absolutely lost the fear and the respect of the Lord in this culture. We've lost it. It's funny for me because I feel sometimes like we treat the Lord like Ned Flanders. And if you're giggling, it means you know who Ned Flanders is. Ned Flanders is from the greatest television show ever produced, The Simpsons. And Ned Flanders is the friendly, godly neighbor that lives next to Homer Simpson. And essentially what happens is Ned just does his thing. He's just a friendly neighbor. He just waves, hokely dokely neighbor, praise the Lord, right? Ned just waves. Ned never interferes. It doesn't matter how late the party goes the day before. Ned's never going to call the cops on The Simpsons. Ned is just a friendly, nice guy. And if you need something for whatever reason, like a cup of sugar, you can go over to Ned's house, knock on the door, and my golly, Ned will have a cup of sugar for you, right? That's Ned Flanders. I believe that we have made God like Ned Flanders. He's like the friendly neighbor that's always there. And he waves nicely, especially on Sundays when we come to church. And he's not going to interfere with your life, really. He's just going to be nice. He's just going to stand by. And when we need something from him, we can go across, knock on the door, and he's going to be just more than happy to give us whatever it is that we're asking from him. I believe that this is part of the problem that we are seeing right now in church. It's part of the problem that we're seeing in our culture. Listen to this. If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, it makes perfect sense to understand that no fear of the Lord is the beginning of worldly wisdom. If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then surely to goodness, if there's no fear of the Lord, that is the beginning of worldly wisdom. And I think maybe that's the reason the church looks like the world. It's because the church has lost its fear of the Lord. You know, if I were to this morning go, church, we're so excited, we're going to do something. We've essentially jumped the shark. We've got to do radical things to get people in here, so this is what we're doing. I present to you this morning a 500-pound lion. Bring it out, ladies and gentlemen. Here it is, a lion. Who doesn't want to come to church now? We've got a live lion in church, right? Imagine for a second I did that. As this thing came out from the corner here, that 500-pound lion, and sat down, every single one of you are doing this. You're literally sitting up in your seats like this, and you're going, where is the exit signs in this building? And even if I said to you guys, his name is Teddy. He loves cuddling. He's so sweet. He's so cuddly. Don't worry about Teddy. He's never hurt anybody before. Now, there is this one zookeeper that went missing. We're not sure what happened there. But he's a friendly, cuddly little lion. Just come on down and play with Teddy. I don't think it would matter how much I said that to you. Nobody's getting up out of their seat, jumping on Teddy. Teddy, how's it going? Every single one of you are like this with Teddy. You're moving around Teddy in a respectful way because you understand it's a 500-pound African lion that has the ability to tear you apart. And that's really what it comes down to this morning. Do we know that God has nothing but the best of intentions for us? Yes. Do we know that He loves us? Yes. Do we know that He's given His only Son for us? Yes. But do we need to understand that He is the Lion of Judah and He can tear this whole thing apart? Yes. We need to understand that. And I just love how David has this understanding of who God is. So when this moment of compromise arrives, where David has the opportunity to compromise, David does not compromise because he understands who God is and he respects the Lord and he is fearful of the Lord. And David says, I will rather come up against 50,000 human armies than have to face the God of all creation. What I love about this moment is also the following. What's incredible is that we see this incredible moment where David overcomes sin, but then later on in David's life, he commits an absolute atrocity. And we know this. We know that later on, as much as David does the right thing here today, later on, David goes on to do unimaginable evil things. And I want to say this to you. A lifestyle of holiness can only happen in the context of a lifestyle of constant revelation of who God is. Overcoming sin is not a one-time event in your life. You're not going to fight one battle, one time, one Tuesday night, walk away from that and go, eat that, devil. Just not how it works. Sin will come back. Sin will continually knock on your door. It is only when we are living in a constant revelation of who this God is, how awesome He is, how amazing it is. It says here it's the fear of the Lord and it is the knowledge of the Lord. It is knowing Him. It is being in a relationship with Him. It is having a revelation of who He is, fresh manna from heaven on a daily basis. That is the thing that empowers you to make the decisions you need to make when everybody is telling you to do something different. Everyone in the culture, potentially everybody in your family. David understands that if God is the only one who made the promise, then God is essentially the only one that can ultimately give the promotion. And that leads us to my next point this morning, my next sort of principle out of the story. David trusted the process connected to the promise. There's two things going on here at the same time. On the one hand, David is running for his life because this king is trying to kill him. On the other hand, David was promised by the prophet. He was anointed to be the next king of Israel. So David is walking around running for his life, knowing that not so long ago, God spoke a word over his life. God promised David essentially that one day David would be the king. And you would think to yourself, surely to goodness, that promise in and of itself gives David enough excuse to take Saul out. Surely David can sort of reason with himself and go, well, God said that He wants me to be the king of Israel. Therefore, if this guy is going to kill me, I need to take matters into my own hands and kill this guy to fulfill God's promise in my life. But David doesn't do that. Why? Because David understands fully that there is a process connected to the promise. Sometimes the most courageous act of faith is the act of doing nothing. I don't know who came up with this, but it is just the worst thing I've ever seen. They've got this, there was boxing, and then there was UFC, and now there's a thing where they just slap each other. Have you seen this? It's like as the human race, we've just gotten bored and lazy to the point where we want to skip all of it. We just want to see slaps in the face. And I'm telling you right now, the next step is going to be just punching in the face. You just punch Mike Tyson, just punching kids in the face is going to be the next thing they're going to have on the TV, right? But they have these guys, and it's the biggest guys you've ever seen, and they'll sit across from each other, and the guy will sort of strap his hand and put the baby powder on it, and then he winds up, and then he slaps the guy. And it's the worst thing you've ever seen, and spit goes flying, and tears come dripping, and the guy's eardrum is bursting, and the crowd goes wild. Yeah! And then what happens is this. The referee goes, he gets to slap again, and you're like, what on earth am I watching? And the guy goes, if you look at the slow-mo replay, let's see, Johnny, the slow-mo replay. Right before the hand impacts Tom's face, Tom kind of pulls away a little bit, and that's a big no-no in this sport. No flinching allowed, so Big Bubba gets another slap at Tom's face, right? If you flinch or pull back before this guy hits you, that's it. He gets another shot. So the art in the sport is not so much can you slap a guy. The art is can you stare a guy in the face while he's winding up and go, mwah, bah, right? Can you do that? And it's almost impossible to do that. You know why it's impossible to do that? Because you're biologically wired to flinch. We're wired to flinch. We're wired to protect ourselves. We're wired to take action. When the chips are against us, we are going to take action because that's just how we are wired. So when we think about faith, we think about Peter jumping out of the boat and walking on water. Yo, what's up, right? We think about that. We think about David out there fighting Goliath. That's what we think about when we think about faith. What we don't think about when we talk about faith is Jesus being quiet before his persecutors, even though he could argue them to the ground. What we don't think about when we think about faith is Jesus saying, after the slap, turn the other cheek. When we think about faith, we think about these big moments of action, and they're spectacular, and they're awesome. When we think about faith, we don't think about being still and allowing the Lord to essentially fight our battles for us. In this moment, David has the opportunity to take action, and he decides to lay down every chance he has of promoting himself. He lays it all down, and he goes, hey, King Saul, I am empowering you, essentially, in the natural, to do with me whatever you want to do with me. You know why, King Saul? My trust and my faith is not in my ability to make myself the king, but my trust and my faith is in the one who promised I would be king. And in the face of every kind of test and trial, I can be still because I know who my God is. Real faith happens when we fundamentally understand that God is the provider, the protector, and the promoter of our lives. And I'm telling you, you're going to be tested in all three. In your life, you are going to be tested in all three. There are going to be moments where you are going to be tested to compromise for provision. There are going to be moments where you are going to be tested to compromise for your own protection. There are going to be moments where you're going to be tested, and this is a big one, for your own promotion. But when we fundamentally understand that He is the protector, He is the provider, He is the promoter, it puts us in a position where we can act in the faith of being still in the moments where we want to take action. God says, stop worrying because I will provide for your needs. I want to tell you this morning that you don't have to take that on. This is a promise we have from the Lord. Matthew 6:33-34. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I want to tell you that even anxiety is you taking emotional responsibility for the things that are going to happen tomorrow. It's an action. You're taking action. Yeah, but I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here worrying. Yes, you are emotionally trying to regain control of the situation. Faith puts us in a place where we can be still because we know He will provide. God says, stop fighting everybody all the time because I will avenge you. You don't have to fight the whole world. You don't have to fight everybody all the time. Matthew 5:38-39. You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. You know, I said earlier that it was a barbaric sport. Maybe it's the most Christian sport we have. Maybe this is what Jesus was talking about. Let me be clear here. When Jesus says turn the other cheek, He's not saying do not defend your life when your life is threatened. You're allowed to defend your life. But what Jesus is saying is don't take offense at everything. Stop taking offense at everything. Allow the offenders to offend. Allow the haters to hate, right? Haters gonna hate. Even that's old now. That's like 1999, right? But let them do what they need to do. Why? Because vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And then I love this. God says, humble yourself so that I can lift you up. James 4:10. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and what will happen? He will lift you up. All of this leads to this incredible moment. David's faith leads to the promise with clean hands and a pure heart. Look at what happens next. You're not going to believe this. David has the opportunity to take this guy out, and he decides not to do it. And then look at what happens. 1 Samuel 31, verses 1-6. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan. It looks like Airbnb. And Malchi-Shua. I don't actually read letters. I just see magical colors and things. The fighting crew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor bearer, listen to this. This is the guy that David could have killed to become the king. Look at what happens. Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together the same day. And what happens in this moment, it is spectacular. You've got to see it. David has the opportunity to take this guy out with his own force to become the king. David decides to honor the Lord instead, and the way the story turns out is Saul and his sons all end up dying on the same day, and David ends up becoming the king. But when David becomes the king, he has not had to compromise on anything to get there. David can now take on the promise the Lord had given him with clean hands and a pure heart. Listen to this. If we have to compromise to get something, we will have to compromise to keep something. I'm telling you what, I've heard this multiple times. It's all just a means to an end. It doesn't matter. It's about winning. It's about succeeding. It's about just getting where I need to get. It doesn't matter who I step on. It doesn't matter who I lie to. It doesn't matter how corrupt I am. It doesn't matter how I behave myself. At the end of the day, as long as I get a W on the board, that's all that matters. But that's not all that matters when it comes to the kingdom of God. It's not about the end result as much as it is about who we are on the journey. And when we honor the Lord, even in those moments when it's tough and it's tight and it doesn't make sense, He will ultimately honor us. I wrote this down. Ladies, the compromise of your purity to get the guy will lead to the compromise of your dignity to keep the guy. Men, the compromise of your integrity to get something will lead to the compromise of your legacy to keep something. David shows us in the most spectacular way that the most powerful thing any of us can do is place our faith in God's promises for us. David knows who the Lord is. David understands the power of God Almighty. But David knows the promises that God has made him. And above all else, David allows those promises to lead him in what he does and what he does not do. David shows us this morning that the best thing, the greatest thing you can do in this life is place your trust fully in who God is, what He says He's done, and what He says He will do. That'll equip you with a wisdom to be what God has called you to be. I'm going to ask that you stand this